Welcome, good evening, hello. Hope you all had a good week. This is episode 43, would you believe it, of Property Avenue WA. A little idea that suddenly becomes episode 43, quite unbelievable. I'm Tony Viner, he's Oscar Souza. I'm commonly referred to as TV. We sometimes call him OD. This is a show that, pardon?
Sometimes call me OD.
I call you OD all the time. But this is, we're also, not only we're doing a live stream, but this will also be a podcast associated with WA property. It's very focused on property, and there's been so much going on in the last week or so with regard to property. It continues to be something very special. And I know personally, my life is pretty much one-dimensional at the moment. It's just non-stop sitting at this desk sometimes, but it's great fun. It's been very interesting and it's very demanding. But we try to, the importance of what we do is very much trying to focus on questions that you may have. It's really important. I think there's got to be questions you have out there associated with property. So we really encourage you to go on our live chat line. You can send us a message, and we would love to listen to you, to hear your questions and see if we can't discover the answers. A couple of things that we will discuss tonight is certainly we will do OD stats and a review of the week that was. We always enjoy listening to what OD's got to say there and the figures and facts that he's got there. The state election coming up here in WA, and it's interesting to see some of the different property bodies and what they're seeking from our state politicians as far as changes and reforms to things property. There's been a bit of a focus on stamp duty in particular, and I will admit that I have been one on that bandwagon for quite some time, and it's interesting. It's interesting that some of those little suggestions, I'm not trying to beat my own drum, but it's interesting some of those suggestions that I've made that I had not read or seen anywhere have suddenly come to the fore. So it's interesting. Also, the other thing that I really think is of interest, maybe just a touch, we will have a quick squeeze out, but there was an article that I read the other day, and it's telling us that women trail men in property ownership, which is really quite intriguing. We'll have a quick touch on that. And the landlord rebate. It's something that we raised a few episodes ago, and it's coming into play come the end of March. But OD being a well-respected property manager and his business dedicated property management, who better to ask? And, of course, he's my co-host. So we'll certainly go through that. And when we first raised this issue, OD hadn't even heard about it. So, and I haven't seen much about it since. So we'll talk to him about that. And also the fact is that there was a headline I noticed about the homeowners, their rush to sell. Is that really happening? Because that seems to be sort of contradictory to what we're talking about with supply and demand. So again, we'll talk to OD and we'll have a little bit of a chat about that. But again, we encourage you, if you've got questions, please ask them, because we really, really look forward to having those. And then those questions we will then raise on our podcast. And, of course, I've got an if question, and I forgot to tell you about it.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure you did.
Hello, mate. Great to see you. Sorry, I didn't even say hello.
No, that's okay, mate. Hello to you, Mr. Viner, and hello to anyone that's watching, listening, or might be watching or listening to this after the event. Our WA real estate market is it's something from people in the real estate industry. We've been waiting for this type of a market, a very, very buoyant, active market. It's quite easy to sell properties at the moment for real estate agents, let's be honest. It's very easy for property managers to rent properties as well. So on one hand, the job is quite easy, because properties, as soon as you get the stock is going out the door. And when I say going out the door, I'm not talking about 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I'm really talking about often a 1 week period. And if it takes a bit longer, that probably means a 2 week period. So it's a great time for the real estate industry, for those people in it, to remain in it and work in it. But just remember, in fact, I saw something on social media just earlier today, and someone had asked a fellow real estate agent, basically said, gee, you guys earn a stack of money, don't you? Like, it's so easy to sell a house. It's, you basically don't do anything for the money these days, do you? And my response, I'm not sure what this lady's response, well, I have a fair idea what her response was, but you know what, it is a bit easier at the moment, but it goes in waves. And certainly for the last 5 or 6 years, it has not been an easy time being a person in real estate, whether in property management or in real estate sales. And in real estate, if you're not earning an income because the market's not there or you just can't get the stock, and we don't have the buoyancy that we've got now, no one's going to pay you. It's as simple as that, which means there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that are forced to leave the industry. So right now, yeah, the real estate industry is having a really good time. We don't know when that's going to end, and it hasn't been going for all that long either. So it's hard work being a real estate person. But so far as our market TV, mate, it's just not letting up. And you will recall, where are we now? It's the 9th of March today. So only 2 or 3 weeks ago, I made a call that I thought, I think things are slowing, or not slowing. I think things are plateauing. I think they're starting to stabilise. Still strong, but it's actually starting to stabilise. The stats are not saying that. The real estate agents that I talk to daily, even the ones that I spoke to today, there's no signs of slowing down. The numbers through home opens, the numbers through rental viewings, it's phenomenal what's going on at the moment. And yeah, I'm not exactly sure when it's going to stop. But
It,
we've
it,
got to ride the
it,
wave.
it's interesting with what you were saying about the agents and that question asked, because just digressing slightly to what you were saying early on. I had a real estate agent ring me about a few things yesterday, and the first comment he made to me was, well, he said, you'd be retiring after all the money you're making. And I said, whoa, stop right there. I'm in the industry of conveyancing, not real estate. There's a significant difference, but it is something that, there's that perception, I suppose, with regard to it. But extending on that, one of the things that we did when we did sort of stop a little bit of sledging between each other, one of the things that we did refer to, and I've probably been around for a fair bit, as my grey hair might suggest. But you've still got some dark pieces in it. Mine hasn't got any. But the part that we were discussing is it? I'm not as buoyant as it is. It's probably not as buoyant in my observation as it was perhaps 10, 14 years ago, whenever that was, when it was absolutely nuts. And that's just my observation based on what, I know my office alone was doing anywhere between 120 and 200 settlements a month.
When was this? Back in 05, 06?
Yeah, about then. Yeah. So, and on top of that, we also had an abundance number of development projects that we were attending to. So that obviously added to that volume. But it was just, I know personally, I had a unit in South Perth and I hadn't even settled. I was up there doing some measurements of it, and people were knocking on the door. This is our word of a lie, knocking on the door and asking if they could buy my unit. And I haven't even settled it. And they were offering more money than what I'd already purchased it for. It was just crazy. So I'm not sure it's quite like that yet. Do you think, or not?
No, I don't think it's quite like that. What we're going through now is probably the most comparable period to that time. So over the last 15 years, what we've got right now is something that's the closest comparison, but I think it is different again. And what we saw in 04, 05, and 06, it started to go crazy. It started to go exponential, and we're not just talking about market activity then. Back then, we're talking about values. Like, we literally saw that nice steady level of sustainable growth suddenly stopped being sustainable, and it suddenly went like this. It really did exponentially go up, and that was through 06, 07, and then 08, GFC basically, and it fell down very quickly, as we all know. So we're not really seeing that at the moment, but we certainly are seeing a very, very high level of activity, and we are starting to see price growth as well. So that's no secret. I think what really is going to either make it or break it is what happens over the next 12 months. So does it remain as consistent as what it is? Does our stock levels get even lower than what they are now? Because there's no let up in terms of the buyers. There's certainly no let up in terms of the renters either. And we're pretty confident that interest rates, even if they do go up they're saying not for another couple of years still. And that was at the Reserve Bank board meeting last week, the first Tuesday of the month. But my bet with what we've got across the country now, I think it absolutely has to happen that we will see one interest rate rise, at least one interest rate rise sometime this year, even though they're not talking about it right now, because I think otherwise our housing market will go out of control. But in terms of why is there so much demand? Well, money is very, very cheap at the moment. And bearing in mind that that's a big difference between what we saw in our current market now compared to what it was back in 05, 06 and 07. Our interest rates weren't what they are back then. They aren't what they are now. Back then, they were still at 6, 7%, and now we're talking around about 2%. So money's so much cheaper, and our local economy, our WA economy, is going through a bit of a boom economically, not just in real estate, but economically, and that's largely fueled by what's going on in the mining sector as well. So, TV, you did mention it earlier, but I want to stress it as well. I know that you do get questions asked of you over the course of the week, and I get a couple as well, but I'm really, really keen for anyone that is watching the show live whilst we're doing it, anyone that's got any questions, or if they've heard a comment that they might want our view on, or it's a bit of a talking point, I'd love to get involved live today, and maybe open the discussion, maybe provide some opinions as to based on whatever questions are. So anyone that's watching or listening, please jump on the keyboard, type us in a question, and we'd love to come back to you during the show.
Yep. In fact, I'm just going to do a little post if I can, and do that. Hey, listen, can you just one thing with regard to it? We may as well, while you're on a roll, I reckon we should go straight to OD stats. So, no, before I do that, on a personal note, last Thursday, you had your birthday on Wednesday. You got old. You became 45.
Geez, mate, you've got a great memory.
Yep, and we're now exactly 20 years apart. Then Thursday, you go in for your first ever knee operation. Then I get this message tonight: TV, won't be long, just finishing mowing the lawn. Mate, is that in the rehab or not? How are you going with the knee anyway?
Look, I've got a meeting, so everything you just said is true. And honestly, 10 minutes ago, or we've been on for 12 minutes, so maybe 16 or 17 minutes ago before the show started, I ran in, I checked with my little girl that she's okay so that I can disappear and do the show. I chucked off my shirt, I put my head over the wash trough in the laundry, turned on the cold water, just washed myself off because I was covered in all the dust and everything from mowing the lawn. Yeah, it was hard work. Should I be doing that? In my opinion, yes, given that I've just had a knee operation about 4 days ago, because the sooner I can get it back to moving the way that it was before, in my expert medical opinion, I think that would be in my best interests. I do, however, have a meeting, an appointment with my surgeon tomorrow, followed up with a physiotherapist appointment as well. I'm not sure if their opinion will be similar to mine so far as mowing the lawn in the dark 4 days after my operation. But I dare say their opinion would be consistent with mine. I'm pretty sure they would think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea.
Right.
Anyway,
so now we've got that.
Just on that, mate, I have to say, I feel like the luckiest guy in the world, because the fact that I'm up and moving around, I'm not on crutches, the pain that I thought that I'd have, like that throbbing pain or even a deep sharp pain in the knee as a result of a pretty intensive operation, I've just come out of that really, really well, not really requiring any painkillers, and I can get around and pretty much live my normal life. So I feel very fortunate, mate, because that's not what I expected. And I know other people that have had knee work done, it's a lot longer before they can resume a normal life. So I feel very, very privileged.
Good.
Are we going to talk any real estate tonight, or should we?
I think you should be giving me. I think it's time for OD stats. What's happening? Give us a review of the week and give us your thoughts on it all. Well, you've given us your thoughts. What about the stats?
Yeah, so the stats, so my thoughts reciprocate or are basically exactly the same as the stats. So Perth metropolitan market over the last 7 days, 930 sales. That includes houses, units, and land. But now I really have noticed in the last 3 months there's been a massive land sale drop off. And as we know, as soon as we came out of COVID and the government, both federal and state, offered those incentives for people to buy land and build land. It was a boost for the construction industry to really get it going. It worked a treat, and we saw land sales absolutely skyrocket. And at some point in time, they reached around about 50% of the weekly sales that were happening through Perth. That really has dropped off now because I'm pretty sure by the end of this month, the availability of those new build grants actually comes to a close. So that makes sense. But that said, there's still 930 sales in the last 7 days. 4 weeks ago, there was 771 sales in the Perth metro area. So that's still an increase of about 150 sales from where we were 4 weeks ago. And we're basically double where we were this time last year. Really interesting though, if we think about it, this time last year, the second week of March, that was right at the time that COVID actually got given a name and our world kind of changed at the spot. So there was a lot of uncertainty as to what was going to happen. Lockdowns, we were starting to come across that concept as well. And as I said, 538 sales in the same week last year. And now 12 months on, we're basically double that. Listings, that's really a concerning point. We're still sitting under 8,000 listings across the entire Perth metropolitan area. Probably 18 months ago, that figure was 13 to 14,000 listings, and we've slowly seen it creep down. But under 8,000 listings is a very clear indication as to why there's such a shortage of available properties for sale. And every single real estate agent, including a good mate of mine who put a new property on the market and had a double home open on Saturday and Sunday, just on the weekend just gone, between 40 and 50 groups of people through on both days. It's not under offer yet. Well, it wasn't at 2 o'clock this afternoon, but it could be by now. So not surprised there, but listings are a major concern. Rental market, again, very, very similar TV. We're just over 700 properties leased in the Perth metropolitan area in the last 7 days. That figure normally is somewhere between 850 to 1,000. So it being on the lower side, it doesn't mean that the rental market's slowing down. It just means there's just not the stock available for property managers to lease those properties. So listings still well under the 3,000 mark. Probably we've got a vacancy rate in Perth of around about 1.15%, which is very, very low. And 12 months ago, so right now we're just under 3,000 properties available, and 12 months ago it was just under 6,000. So we can see there's just been a massive drop, basically a 50% drop in stock. And I'm leasing properties. There's many property managers that I work with that are leasing properties, and properties are flying out the door, and in many cases, people are offering more than what the actual asking price is. Final stat is Geraldton. We often talk about, and we have lots of people that watch the show in the Midwest. That rental market over there is absolutely crazy. I know that a lot of property managers at the moment in Geraldton, instead of just having a rental viewing and then seeing what applications come in post the rental viewing, they're actually, a few of them are going back to what we saw during the COVID period, where we couldn't just have many, many people coming through. We actually get applications from people before they get to see the property, and we do a preliminary assessment of those applications, and then with a select few, do we actually show the rental property to. So we need to do whatever we can do at the moment to satisfy the laws surrounding COVID and social distancing, but we also need to fill those rental properties as well. So Geraldton has got just over 60 properties available through the whole of Geraldton. That's all the suburbs of Geraldton, just over 60 properties available. So I did have a quick scan also on realestate.com and having a look at what the asking rentals are for those very few properties. But looking at the asking rentals compared to where that was at even 6 months ago, my estimate, I'd say comfortably there's a 15% increase in rental prices, and it could even be a bit more. And that's purely because there's just no stock available, and there's many, many people after that short amount of stock.
Yeah, it really is mind-boggling, and to see what you talk about as far as properties, 40 and 50 people going to each viewing. I know where we are in Vic Park, we've seen properties just in our street that have had a sign up and suddenly, for sale sign, and by the end of the week, they've got an under offer or sold sign on. It's been quite, and Jude says, oh, there's a sign up. Let's see how long that takes. Next minute, 2 days later, there's a sticker on it. It's quite incredible. And yet there was a couple of properties in our street, and it's a pretty long street, but there was a couple of properties in our street probably 12 months ago that were there for a long time with for sale signs. Now that's non-existent. So it is interesting.
You mentioned something before, mate. You mentioned something before, and that was, and maybe did you refer to an article that you had read about the anticipated almost flooding of the market, where there's a lot of people that are looking to actually put their property on the market between now and the end of the year?
Yes, I did.
To sell?
Yeah.
So was that a survey that was done?
Let me look for that, because I've got so many articles here, and I did try to have that covered. But yeah, it was an article from I think it was out of the West Australian, and it was advising the fact that here we go. More than a third of Australian homeowners. So this is what I mean about you've got to be careful, I feel, and this is what we've said for a long time, and hence why we do Property Avenue WA. Because when you read the article a little bit further, more than a third of Australian homeowners, right, are planning to sell in the next 5 years. Now, remember, I did a stat.
5 years?
Yes.
Sorry, I thought it was like in the foreseeable future.
Same.
Within the next
same.
months.
Yeah, I was the same, because I just saw the article. I've had a really busy week, so my research this week is probably not as thorough as I normally would like it to be. But yeah, so in the next 5 years, and they're looking to cash in on a booming market driven by low mortgage rates and improving economy. That is a report by Westpac.
Right. Okay.
So they showed 35% of households surveyed were considering selling, and more than double the number that was going to occur prior to the pandemic. And more than 1 in 10 were already in the process of putting their property in the market or planning to do so in the next 12 months. Now, if you remember rightly, I got that stat last year where they did a survey, and there was a million people on the East Coast, right, were planning to sell in 2021, right? A million
people,
right? And of that 1 million property sales, there was just under, I think it was around about, if round figures, if my memory serves me correctly, 350,000 of those were overseas investors or Australians that wanted to offload, right? And then there was a large percentage of downsizing and upsizing and whatever. Then there was that percentage that wanted to move out of East Coast to either Queensland or WA, right? So that was an interesting stat. And when you're talking about 1 million, that's obviously a significant survey.
Yeah, mate, I think it's you often go on about the devil being in the detail, and whether we're talking specifically about our local market here in WA, which is what we like to talk about, or are we talking about the country? Trying not to be overly critical, but for a major bank to come out and make a representation that in the next 5 years, 1/3 of the people surveyed will be selling their properties, it's almost a bit of a useless stat. I mean, who knows what's going to happen over 5 years, and is that really a bank trying to talk something up or make something out of nothing. But the other stat that you mentioned, and that being 10% of people surveyed within the next 12 months would be looking to sell their property. I would have thought that's very realistic.
Yeah.
That makes a whole lot more sense. But that's far different from 1/3 of the, because it's 10% versus 33 or 34%.
Yep.
That stat just sounds a little bit ridiculous and also a bit useless as well.
Yeah. No, it
That's
was
not very
interesting.
nice of me, but I think it's truth.
No, we're here to chat and give our opinions like everyone else, and it's only our thoughts and our opinions, and we're not here to offend people, but we've got a right to an opinion. That's the beauty of doing what we do, I feel.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
no, I don't think you need to apologise. You and I don't agree all the time. There you go.
Yeah. No, we don't. I like to disagree with you from time to time, TV, and in all honesty, it's not that difficult. Hey, mate, there's one thing that I do just want to touch on, and you mentioned about these incentives that our state government are providing to landlords with the impending finishing of the moratorium period, which at this stage, and I can't see that it's going to be extended, but at this stage it's going to be the 28th of March, which is some 3 weeks away. And then from the 29th of March, then the normal Residential Tenancy Act provisions resume, and that's the way that it should happen moving forward. However, sorry, forget I said however. What that has meant is that come the 28th of March, with the normal Residential Tenancy Act provisions resuming, if tenants are not complying with their lease obligations, and one of those major lease obligations obviously is to pay rent and to make sure that they do not fall into arrears. If tenants are not complying with their lease obligations, the COVID bill now draws to a close, and the landlord is entitled to take action by way of serving a breach on the tenant, which makes them rectify their rent arrears, so they get themselves back in front. And if they're unable to do it, then obviously they will proceed to termination, and ultimately the tenant would be evicted from the property, and the landlord would go about looking for a new tenant. And really speaking, that's no different to if you've got a mortgage on a property and you're an owner-occupier, but for whatever the reasons are, you are not able to keep up with your mortgage repayments. Ultimately, you won't end up living in the house anymore. You'll need to sell the property, or the bank will sell it, and then they'll on-sell it to someone who can afford it. That's basically the way that it works. That said, and something that, again, so far as these rental incentives to landlords that you mentioned, there's been a change of the rules over there just in the last few days that so far has not been very well publicised, but it's going to affect many, many landlords that have got tenants at the moment that have fallen into arrears. And that change is this. And I personally believe that it probably relates to our current state election.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Mr. Viner.
Would you care to we'll post that on our Facebook page, that information too, by the way. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, we can do, but it's going to have to be my version of it, because
that's right.
According to the Department of Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety, which is DMIRS, which governs our rental industry, they haven't actually made a publication about this yet.
Okay.
But this is it in layman terms. As I said, it's from the 29th of March, a landlord should be able to, for those people that are not paying their rent, they should be able to go through the process of serving a breach and then move towards a termination. However, there's been a change of goalposts to that resuming of the Residential Tenancies Act. And basically, and this bit's really important, any rent arrears that are incurred up to the 28th of March 2021, if instead of the landlord moving straight to a breach and termination, what they actually need to do for arrears that have been brought about during the COVID period up to and including the 28th of March, they're not actually able to move straight to a termination or serve a breach and then move to a termination. They have to go through what they've been going through over the last 12 months, and that is go to what's called a mandatory conciliation meeting, which is facilitated by DMIRS, and that basically is to try and come up with a payment plan that the tenant must comply with, and basically pay off those arrears over whatever the agreed plan is. And if they do default on that new payment plan, then they will just, the landlord will move to a normal termination. So that's basically the shift of the goalposts. Any arrears that are incurred from the 29th of March onwards, though, the landlord is entitled to actually move straight to a breach and then termination. So what it's done basically, and this is why I think it's a bit politically driven, it's actually given tenants more time. If they've incurred arrears, it's actually given them a bit more time, as opposed to there being a massive rental crisis with lots of evictions from the 29th of March onwards. It's actually bought tenants a bit more time, and strategically by the current state government, I think they've actually put this in place, and it's probably a coincidence that there's an election happening at the moment, so that whatever rental crisis we've actually got at the moment, we're trying to, or rather they're trying to soften that by making sure there's not going to be the evictions that probably would have happened if on the 29th of March landlords could just start evicting non-paying tenants. So did I make that clear enough, or
Yeah, I think you did.
or are you confused by it? I'm basically saying, yeah, there's just a shift of the goalposts, which again has not been very well publicised yet. It's quite recent, but it's very, very important because it's only 3 weeks away, and it basically says that it was always the case that on the 29th of March, if you've got tenants that are not paying their rent, that you'll be able to follow the normal Residential Tenancy Act process, and that is serve them a breach, and if they don't rectify the breach, then you'll move towards termination. But now you can't actually do that. You have to go through to a mandatory conciliation process for any rent arrears that have accrued up to the 28th of March this year. If they go into arrears from the 29th, or if there are new arrears from the 29th of March forward, then you can actually go straight to termination. So socially, it's actually a good thing that the government is putting that in place. But again, it's just a shift of the goalpost that landlords will suffer the brunt of it, I guess. And property managers in particular need to be well across that change in legislation, because it's going to affect what they were planning on doing in 3 weeks' time.
Yep. Do you know why they made that change?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no, because right now, and this is what over the last couple of months there's been this talk every other day basically about the rental crisis that we're going to have, and there's going to be so many homeless people because as of the 29th of March, we're allowed to serve a termination if people are not paying their rent. Prior to that, and over the last 12 months, there's been what's called the COVID Amendment Bill, and that basically has prevented evictions over the entire span of the moratorium period. So that original moratorium period was for 6 months from March through to September, but then we approached the end of September and they decided to extend it for 6 months, which now takes it to March 2021. And just over the last couple of months, the state government hasn't really done too much about it. And we do have a state election going on right now for the government to now be, and I haven't heard the McGowan government actually say anything about it in the media, but for them to actually say we've taken further steps to absorb the effect of the rental crisis that we've got, which basically means for those tenants that are currently in rent arrears up to the 28th of March, originally you were going to be served with an eviction notice unless you were able to pay off those arrears, but now we're actually making it mandatory that instead of you being evicted, you must go to a mandatory conciliation meeting and put in place a repayment plan in order to pay those arrears off. Basically meaning that landlords can't terminate the way that they originally were told that they could. So why have they done it? From a social point of view, from a social responsibility, it's obviously a very good thing because no one wants to see homeless people, and people that are, so no one wants to see that. By the same token, landlords over the last 12 months have, in the main, had to keep up with their mortgage repayments and pay all the bills associated with their rental property. But there's been a protection for tenants that if they're not able to pay the rent, the landlord somehow has to find a way to continue to keep up with their payments. So it was now about to even it back up where the landlord could And what's favourable to the landlord at the moment is that we've got such a very hot, buoyant rental market, which means if they needed to evict a tenant, it's not going to be very difficult for them to find a new tenant, maybe even have a rental increase and start getting the rent paid for their investment property. But with this change in legislation, or the extension basically of this one condition of the COVID bill, they're not going to be able to evict these non-paying tenants straight away. They have to come up with a payment plan, and the tenant has to come to that meeting as well. And ultimately, it means that the landlord is just going to have to carry the can for a bit longer. So it's a good policy, but it's just a shifting of the goalpost that it'll cause a lot of frustration for landlords, because for 12 months they haven't been able to evict non-paying tenants, and now that 12 months is in effect going to be extended for another 3 months.
With your business, Dedicated Property Management, and obviously the fact that you are also, beyond that, you also do a lot of coaching of other real estate firms in their property management side of things.
Yeah.
Is that in those discussions? Is that a big issue here in WA as far as non-payment of rent? There is a problem out there? Because I know there's a lot of talk about it, but is that really happening?
Yeah, it is. With the sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback, mate. I can hear myself in the background there, but I still work with a few officers through the Perth metropolitan area. Of the 3 or 4 I do that for, probably 2 or 3 of them don't really have an issue, because they've actually controlled and maintained the rent arrears of their tenants, and they've worked with them over the last 12 months during COVID to make sure that there's not going to be a major problem come the end of this COVID bill. But there probably is one office, and it's less about what the office has done. It probably more so relates to where all the rental properties are that this office manages. And I guess ultimately that relates to the socio-economic and the demographics of a particular area, where there might be a higher degree of unemployment or employability of the demographic population within a certain location, or maybe a handful of suburbs. So it's for probably 75% of the offices I work with, no, it's not really an issue. But for one office in particular that deals with lower demographics and lower socio-economic areas, it absolutely is an issue. So again, from the humanity point of view, it's actually a good thing, because it buys the tenants a bit more time. And for those tenants that have been trying to do the right thing but just haven't been able to afford, paying the rent or paying the full rent, there's always ways that you can work with those. Unfortunately, as always, there are some people that just abuse the system, and this actually provides them almost a bit of a get out of jail free card, at least for another 3 months. So
Yep. Hey, that's really good, and I really that was I do give you credit occasionally, and that was a really good insight with regard to that, because I felt as though it was something I was thinking about the other day, and I thought, we really need to touch on this again, because it's getting close to that deadline. And as I say, there's not a lot. I haven't seen much about it at all. Not that I'm in that field, but I obviously go through all different articles and read different bits and pieces, and I hadn't seen a lot about it at all, to be honest. So that's brilliant. That was good. The other little headline, we will make reference to the state election, which I think's a really important part. Of course, that's due this weekend, the elections. Although we've been able to vote since 24th of February or something, haven't we?
Yeah, it has been. And I was going to be one of those early voters, but just didn't get to it. So, have you voted yet?
No.
Are you gonna? Where is it? Is it this weekend that you have to vote by?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Okay.
11th.
Yep.
11th. Is that right? 11th, 12th, whatever it is. Yeah. I've been so preoccupied with so many other things. It's sort of been on the back burner. And every time I drive past, there's a voting booth and all the marquees and all that set up for all the different political parties here in Geraldton. Because I just came up here a few days ago to sort a few things out and catch up with my darling mum, and of course my fabulous staff at Champion Bay. And So I've sort of been hovering here and there, and it's only when I drive past I must do that. Then of course off you go and do something else. So,
Yeah.
So getting back to that, so what I thought would be really interesting to cover, and there's been a few articles with regard to that, is what the various bodies associated with property are all seeking, and what are the political parties, the main political parties, what are they suggesting, or what are they offering with regard to the state election and the world of property? What have you observed? Have you observed anything from that angle?
Mate, I'm absolutely across what our real estate industry bodies such as REWA, Urban Development Institute of Australia, Property Council of Australia as well. I'm very across. I read all the publications that they put out to their members about what they're lobbying the state government for, and a lot of it does relate to stamp duty, as you said, but there are some other taxes as well along the way that that there really needs to be some reform on, because there hasn't been reform in that area for so many years. But I have to tell you what I really think. And firstly, I applaud our bodies in the real estate industry here in WA. I think they do a really, really good job in formulating a very good argument, a justification for it. They do a feasibility analysis of it, and make it very easy for the government to hopefully just adopt what their recommendations are, because it's not just all about reducing. What I have seen them do is, obviously we need to see a reduction in these taxes, but they also then come up with other suggestions for creating revenue streams for the government in a different area, or maybe to a lesser extent, and maybe for those parties that can afford to pay it more than ones that can't. And you've touched on, seniors, for example, and retirees that might be looking to downsize, and the cost for them to downsize just by way of the taxes sometimes means that they just won't even do it, because it just doesn't make any sense. So they need to make concessions for those sorts of parties. But I have to tell you what I really think. And
Okay.
whilst I think these bodies do a great job, I can't see any movement whatsoever. Not so far as this election is concerned. I really can't, because the amount of revenue that they do draw from these property-related taxes is enormous. It's kind of easy money for them, and also we're still in a pretty uncertain economic time, and mostly to do with COVID as well. That from both a state, to a lesser extent state, but probably more so even a federal point of view, I can't see any relaxation whatsoever of these pretty easy revenue streams for the government, because as we all know, our debt has gone up massively in the last 12 months, and there's a lot of debt to pay back. So that's just what I think. I think the reality is what we're actually looking for in terms of a reduction in these taxes, I just can't see it happening.
I'm sort of inclined to agree, only because of the fact that it's pretty well been suggested that it's pretty well suggested. Well, Mark McGowan has been openly saying, "Well, too bad, so sad. It ain't going to happen." He's not even contemplating looking at reform of stamp duty. And the focus, from what I've observed, is about homelessness and sorting that side of things out when it comes to property. I'm not sure whether that's has a real impact on the. This may sound very contentious, what I'm saying, but what I'm getting at is it's a different part of the property world. It's, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm getting at? It's sort of associated with
social issues.
Side of things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's social issues versus the more of the economic issues, I guess.
Yep, exactly.
And if the broad argument is that they need that revenue stream to invest in social solutions and the social issues like housing, which are obviously probably the biggest one, and homelessness, they need the revenue stream to support that. So it's not that. I think they are delivering quite a large surplus as well, but I don't know what the forecast is for the next couple of years. So, but I just think mostly to do with COVID and the amount of spending that the government's had to do over the last 12 months, non-essential reform And from their point of view, this would be non-essential reform. I just can't see it getting a look in whatsoever.
I mean, the suggestion is that the current government's going to get in quite easily, but obviously to be fair, I suppose the Liberals, what they are proposing, and they are proposing a bit along the lines of what I've been saying. They're looking to try and do something for cutting the cost of stamp duty for seniors, looking to downsize. Not quite as what I was. Not quite what I was expecting, or what I've been suggesting in my own world.
In terms of how aggressive the reform might be.
Yeah. I think, and it's probably one of those reforms that sounds good, but is it ever going to make the grade? Probably not in this election. But it would be really good to see, because I have spoken to people who've asked the question to me, who would like to downsize, would like to get something smaller, like to be somewhere near the grandchildren, and in one case, single grandmother, and when she considers the cost to sell being real estate fees, and then the cost to buy being stamp duty, she's going, I can't afford that because I won't have enough resources. And she's trying to sort of take the opportunity of having some money in the kitty to sort of help her semi-retirement. That ain't going to happen in the current structure.
Yeah. The other thing being, as we know, we've got a very, very buoyant real estate market here at the moment, so far as transactions are concerned. But then there's also, we know that values are going up as well. Now, our stamp duty is calculated based on a sliding scale, so the more expensive the property, the higher rate of stamp duty you're going to pay. So there's very easy justification. It makes sense that revenue stream over the last 12 months for the state government is substantially going to increase over the next 1 to 2 years, not because of anything that they're doing, but there's a much greater volume of transactions, number one, but then also the values that we're talking about are higher as well. So if I was the state government, why would they? It doesn't make any sense. There's many more pressing issues that they need that revenue stream for, and it's what the existing structure that they've got surrounding stamp duty being number one. It's not strangling our real estate market. Reducing it obviously means that more people can do more things, and if anything, it might stimulate our market. But right now, we don't have a strangled real estate market, so apart from the fact that we're well overdue reform, there might not be too much of an argument for the reform right now.
No. That being said, you talk about REWA and President Damien Collins. I wonder if he's the sort of person who would entertain if we approached him to come on our podcast. Do you know him?
I know him. I know him pretty well, actually. The only thing, he loves to talk real estate, and he's very, very good at it as well. Everyone wants a piece of him, though, I guess, and that's what we expect. So it might be hard, but no harm in asking the question, TV.
But getting back to his point, I also like, and it's like what you're saying with regard to, he's not sort of saying, well, we'll clean off and have no income. I like the concept. If we're going to have a reform, we're not going to change it completely. Then the concept of giving people the choice, because it is a massive impost for a straight up sort of cost. It really is. It's significant, as you say, and don't go to the upper end, even 300,000 or 400,000, which in the scheme of things is not. I know it sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but what I'm saying is, in the scheme of things, that's not the top end as such, and yet it's still a very large sum of money when it comes to stamp duty. And so, what Damien's suggesting on behalf of the REWA is that you would do it where you would have a payment strategy, if you like. So it's not paid up in full, but it's paid over a term. And to me, that's probably what's he called, a two-stream revenue collection method. And so that to me sounds like a really logical way of doing it, and it becomes manageable because it's huge.
Yeah, so I totally agree, and I've read that, and I've seen some Property Council of WA, Property Council of Australia feedback on that as well. And I think what our industry bodies are putting forward makes a lot of sense. It's really well thought out. It's well justified. Feasibility-wise, it makes a whole lot of sense. But what that doesn't take into account is probably two things. Number one, it doesn't really have regard for the spending brought about by COVID, and therefore the repaying of that debt. And then the other thing is that is not working in our favour. Our real estate market at the moment is so good. It's so active that reducing those costs, obviously that's going to increase activity, but we're not really struggling for activity at the moment anyway. So I think it's really well thought out and well written, but I don't think that there's enough justification for it as high priority for the government for the current election.
One thing that I think is doable, and very little has been said, but I took particular notice about the Strata Community Association WA, and they were referring to the fact there is 300,000 people that live in WA who live in strata title properties, and they are expecting that to increase. And their issue is that they feel that that there needs to be some sort of legislation or something put in place to fix the black hole, as they call it, when it comes to information. They reckon there's too many. You've got Landgate, you've got the Strata Community Association, and then you've probably got, I suppose, the next group to that would be the strata managers and whatever. But there's not a lot of consistency with information, and you'll find, and I know from first hand, you find that people are being shoveled from one pillar to post and never getting the right answers or getting the full answer. You know what I mean? It's one of those areas. And I must admit, I've got to go back to Matty Ellis, who's a lovely friend of mine who's very well versed on the strata reform, but I will follow him up to see if we can't get him on as a guest. He did say before Christmas he'd be happy to do so, but he'd be a great one to have a conversation about strata titles, because I think it is a really topical topic. But yeah, I felt that when I read that is one area that I think any government should seriously consider, and not going to impact. I think it will be a plus when it comes to that area of real estate.
Yeah, I totally agree. Look, so there has been a lot of strata reform and changes to the Strata Titles Act. There will significantly be, because basically for people that aren't aware, strata title typically means group dwelling, medium density and high density. So in particular, when we look at any of the medium to large size apartment developments, and there's more and more and more of those springing up everywhere, that's all strata titled properties. But in addition, conceptually, if you look at a suburb these days, or some of the smaller suburbs, under the changes to the strata scheme, what they're actually proposing, and developers are going to be getting involved in this, is building, as we see a suburb, they're basically going to be getting a big parcel of land and building what they call like a strata community or a strata village. So to the naked eye today, it might actually look like just a suburb like any other suburb, but in fact, and that's all green title lots, so everyone owns their own piece of land. But what they're looking at doing is having large pieces of englobo land, they call it, and then they actually develop it with commercial properties in there, with residential, with community facilities, but that's all going to be under a strata scheme. So it's just going to get more and more common and more detailed. It's something that you don't really see much of at all here in WA. It's actually quite popular in the United States. Things like gated communities, that's often those are actually strata or the strata equivalent over there.
What do you call
gated communities? So that's just an example, but in the US, for example, they have things that are called gated communities. So it's kind of like when you go into an apartment development, and there's like a security gate and visitors parking out the front, and then you've got, say, a block of units. What this gated community is basically exactly the same, but it's kind of like, how can I describe? It's kind of like you've got a suburb. It can be any suburb. It can be Victoria Park. But imagine if for Victoria Park you only had 2 or 3 entrances into Victoria Park, and each of them had a gate. So the only way that you can actually get into Victoria Park is if you've got a pass or you've got a permit. It's like a gated community, and yeah, so every Tom, Dick, and Harry can't go in there. It almost becomes a bit exclusive. So I don't know that I've tried to explain to my recollection of what I've physically seen in the United States, but yeah, we're certainly moving more towards these strata villages. But I guess the point that you were making before, TV, is that's is not so much to do with revenue for the state government, but it's a lot to do with the education of WA people, and in fact people that deal in strata title property, whether it be real estate agents, strata managers, property managers, valuers as well, because strata is very detailed, it's very, very complicated, and it's probably just getting more and more complicated as we go. It's not my area, never ever will be. Because I'm busy doing other things, but even if I wasn't, strata is not where I'd go because it's an absolute minefield.
It is indeed, and I've had my share of involvement in it. And I don't profess to be an expert, but I probably need to brush up on a few things. Hey, listen, I cannot believe the time.
Yeah, I
We,
just looked at it then myself.
I know. I'm just going. I've got to tell you though, one little headline: women trail men in property ownership. And the situation being is they're saying that exclusive ownership, meaning multiple people of the same gender on a title, sits at 26.2% for women and 29.9% for men, while sole ownership by gender reported similar levels, 24% women, 27% men, mixed gender 43.9%. And this was a CoreLogic stat. And basically, they were highlighting that based on the fact of the wage and wealth gaps.
Yeah, right. Okay. And on the back of International Women's Day
Yep, yep.
yesterday.
So it was I don't know what. I didn't read the full article, but I just thought it was a very interesting stat. I mean, I don't know how important it is, but and obviously the focus is around well, from what I've quickly read, it appears that it's associated with the implications of wage and wealth, the wealth gap, which has been an issue for quite some time. But yeah, I just thought there was an interesting little point that we could probably raise. It was an interesting stat that was raised with regard to the gender gap.
Look, it is, and I guess the thing is with that, I mean, CoreLogic, obviously, they're very well qualified to provide that sort of statistics because they basically hold that information and they know who owns what property. So I think we can expect that they've actually provided accurate data there. But what I would say is that I don't know what the statistics are, but it's pretty well known that so far as leadership positions, directorship positions for public companies and even for private companies, I think it's now weighting more towards an equal distribution between male and females, but it's certainly always been more male weighted so far as directors of both public and private companies. And what we often see as well, because of the liability associated with those males that have directorships, often what we see is in a marriage or, well, but mostly I'm talking about with families and in a marriage, instead of putting properties in the male's name, in the father of the house's name, often they'll put the properties in the wife's name because she doesn't carry the liability. Because if she's not the director of a board or of a
Yep.
public or a private company, then she doesn't carry that liability. And so from a purely from a liability point of view, it's easier just to put properties in the wife's name, and that is on the assumption, obviously, that there has been more male seats at board level than what there has been for the females. And as I said, but we do see that seems to be evening up a little bit, probably over the last 10 years, and I'm sure it's going to even up a hell of a lot more. So it probably surprises me that there's more properties out there with male names on there than there are female. I thought it might have even swung back the other way a little bit.
Very interesting. Mate, we'll wind up, I think, because we're really, when I look at the time, we could go on forever. There's so much going on. I've got so many other articles and things.
I was going to say, have we actually covered anything have we covered even 50% of what you wanted to cover today?
Yeah, we did. We covered all the points that I raised. We covered those. Yeah. But there's a list of others that I was going to cover, and I'd love to try and get a guest on next week, a regional guest, because one of the articles that I highlighted and retained in my little info sheet is, should you invest in regional WA? And I reckon that'd be great to get a couple of agents or someone. Henry Van Til, he's been a guest in the past, and I should chase Henry up and see if that's something he'd like to do. And it would be nice to get someone from the southwest or somewhere like that, or Denmark. I've got a contact in Denmark. I should see if he might come on. And
I've got a few contacts. I've got a few contacts in the southwest in terms of real estate agents as well. So let's chat about that and see if we can line someone up for next week. That's a really good idea.
Okay, question. Without notice.
If question.
The if question. If you had to teach someone one thing, what would it be?
Resilience.
Okay.
Yeah, resilience. Just getting back on the bike, just falling over, stuffing up, making a mistake, making it again, but no matter what, you just get up and keep going. And I think the famous, the word that, or the saying that always sits in my mind, which I think my mother-in-law has mentioned to me before, just keep one foot in front of the other. What about you, TV?
Mine is respect.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm a big one on it. Respect each other, respect what we're doing, respect what you've got. And, I don't know whether it's something you can teach people, but you'd like to sort of identify it maybe and sort of say, hey, we really, it's an area that I just feel really strongly about. Respect the confidentiality, respect the conversations, respect when you're on social media, when you do whatever you do. When you've got clients that are in business, respect their story and respect the different things that they're experiencing. I'm a big believer in it, and I really, it's something that I sort of quietly encourage my grandchildren, and it's certainly something that I can proudly say my three boys, it's something that I've encouraged my three boys, and they're now, Luke, our youngest, is 32. And I'm certainly proud that I think they hold that in as a high value in the way they conduct themselves. But yeah, it's one of those things.
That's really good. That's really good one.
We're going to wind up. We really, really appreciate everybody being on board, and we will have a podcast. It'll be uploaded, whatever the case be, on iTunes. You can get access to iTunes. You can also get it on our Facebook page. You can click on the site, and I believe we're now available via Spotify and Google. So I'll let you know more information about that. So yeah, we really want you to follow us, get subscribe, and it's something that we really feel passionate about, and it is. The idea of the whole exercise is to keep people informed. And to my couple of very, very close friends who've had some real challenges in the last 24 hours, just want to know, and for all those other people that are doing it tough, whatever it may be, particularly when it comes to family members, our hearts go out to you, and we think the world of you, and hang in there, because hopefully things will turn around. Thank you to everybody for what you've done. Look forward to another fabulous week. Thanks, AD. It's been sensational, mate. And we will look forward to having a chat again next week. Please take care, and cheers.